If you're an author looking for a new twist to your crime novel, have I got the interview for you. Today, we're talking all about unique white-collar insurance crimes and how you can be implementing this into your story in a way that Hollywood maybe gets a little bit on the wrong side. Today, we're going to be breaking down twists and turns and specific cases that you can jump into when it comes to creating your stories that are going to be more unique from some of our other writing counterparts who focus more on the law enforcement or the private investigation side of things. You are going to experience some really cool stories in today's interview with Rich, so let's jump into the conversation.
Hello, I'm Richard Wickliffe. I'm a author, a writer, primarily crime fiction, but it stemmed from my background. For over 20 years, I managed investigation teams that investigate white-collar crimes, insurance-related crimes, and that sort of thing in Miami, which is never short on exciting type of work. And so that's what kind of sparks my fiction writing brain, and hopefully it can help a lot of other writers as well.
And I'm really excited because you are an author, so you're going to be able to break this down really well for us. And I want to jump right into talking about unique white-collar insurance crimes. So as someone who is investigating these unique white-collar insurance crimes, what are some of those job specifications if someone were going to get into this field?
A lot of companies hire former law enforcement, which, of course, that would come with investigative experience. I've seen companies hire retired FBI, even CIA, because obviously those people can come in and the investigation part's over with. Some other companies, they enjoy hiring from within with people that already have sort of a foundational knowledge of the work that's already going on, and then they learn the investigative piece. So both ways are good. People have degrees in criminology, that sort of thing. I sort of fell into it by accident. I was in Miami, and I think the thought of investigating these things may have seemed daunting to some. So they would do job postings and nobody would put in. In fact, they paid bonuses at that time, and I put in and I got it. And that was nearly 25 years ago. And I never had a boring day after that.
I love that. So when it comes to insurance investigations, what are some of those qualifications that people need to have? You talked a little bit about a background potentially in law enforcement and kind of knowing how to do those investigations, and some people don't. So when you are going to apply for a job like this, what are some of those qualifications a person might need?
Well, in addition to the criminology training or any sort of law enforcement, that is really good. But handling things in good faith and giving people the benefit of the doubt is the more important, kind of softer side to this. Because as a reminder, we tell people we're not police. We don't carry guns. We don't have badges. We can't make arrests. We simply do the investigative part, and we decide whether something should be paid or perhaps not paid. So it's very important to have that soft, what we call just kind of a good-natured, good handling, because plenty of times some cases work out to be completely legitimate, and we thank them for their time and we move on. However, on the other side, sometimes things, they take a darker path and they go a different direction, and that's when we're able to get other agencies involved. So to answer your question, the number one trait we used to look for when I interviewed people was a natural curiosity. People don't ask a question and someone answers and they go, okay, move on to the next question. They need to pause and drill down about that answer and be naturally curious about things. And more in today's age, a background in analytics is really important. So much more of the work is done today through analytics, databases, computer use. And so that's pretty important as well.
Now, when it comes to this, do you find that the majority of your time is spent doing paperwork and working inside of the office, or is it more going out and doing this investigative work?
That's a great question, because I separate the types of cases into property cases, which picture things that are tangible: thefts, burglaries, fires, deaths, injuries. That's kind of tangible stuff. On the non-tangible, you have, imagine billing type situations where entities, businesses, medical clinics, whoever are billing things that are illegal or wrong. Those jobs are done almost entirely indoors, maybe at a cubicle, at a desk, and could be viewed as sort of boring or routine. On the property side, it still involves people being out in the field, knocking on doors, meeting people in person to take statements. Little asterisk, COVID kind of threw a monkey wrench into that a little bit, but it'll probably get back to that.
Okay, interesting. So, when it comes to insurance investigations, there are a lot of different facets to it and a lot of different avenues that people can take within the context of their job. So, I kind of want to break down what a typical day might look like for somebody in the field. And I know because there's different realms that we can talk about, kind of just give us an overview of somebody who is maybe more on that billing side and the overview of somebody who's more on the property side.
Well, every case starts with the investigators getting sort of an assignment. They don't cruise around and look for things that don't look right, because the vast majority of any business, I don't care what business you're in, whether it's accounting, insurance, any other sort of business, the vast majority you would like to think are legitimate and honest and forthright. However, you have the bad apples. So the way that the investigators get the cases, they're usually assigned or referred to them from someone else, a third party. Maybe a worker thought something didn't look right. Or a lot of times we get tips from law enforcement. They can say, hey, we just arrested someone and they're claiming XYZ was not accurate, something like that. So a case will come in where, to answer your question, they might get a new claim the minute they walk in that day. And it starts with contacting all the parties. And it's funny that almost every investigation in the world, I don't care what you're investigating, starts with the same element: getting people's version of the story, and then the investigator checks all the aspects of that answer to see if it's accurate. Where they were at what time of day, how they purchased something, who they were with. Almost any crime kind of involves those same elements.
I love that. Okay. So, with that in mind, we are doing a lot of fact checking. We're doing a lot of investigative work. And I know that maybe the typical day to day isn't going to be incredibly exciting for stories. So, let's talk a little bit about some interesting cases that authors can be thinking about to implement into their stories. I know you've had your fingerprints on a lot of different cases over the years. So, break down some interesting things that authors could potentially be keeping in mind as they're planning their next story.
Thanks. When I was recently speaking to another group of writers, that's how I sort of couched it. That, hey, if you're a writer, and this group was primarily crime writing, for example, crime thrillers, sometimes you get stuck where you don't know where else to go, anything fresh or new. Because think about it, your protagonist, your hero, is usually an investigator, a cop, or a private eye. They seem to be something like that. Well, the insurance investigator on my side, I thought, it's kind of a fresh new aspect. And it adds sort of an irony because they don't have a gun, they don't have a badge. No one has to talk to us if we don't want to. It's almost like we have to work a little harder. So some of the cases we've seen have absolutely sparked several of my books, where it just gave you that kernel of an idea. And then if you Google it, you see that it might be much more prominent or more dangerous than it could be. And an example of some is I call it art fraud on the high seas. It's someone put in a claim because they had very expensive paintings from Salvador Dali worth tens of thousands of dollars stolen. Well, we believe the theft really did occur, but the gentleman who had the paintings didn't quite add up as an art aficionado. He lived in a low rent apartment, didn't have a good job. And we asked him where he bought it, and it was on a cruise ship. And I know a lot of people have been on cruises and you're enjoying your pina colada, and they make that announcement, art auction on the Lido deck, 5 o'clock. And you show up at this thing and people have had a few drinks and they have money in their pocket. And a lot of times they pour you the free champagne. There's guys in suits, whatever. And they have art all over the place that's about to go to auction, these oil paintings. And they go for in the thousands. It's not cheap stuff. Well, it turns out, when talking to some of my peers with other investigative agencies, it kept going back to cruise ships. And there's one company that manages a vast majority of the art auctions. And I won't name it here. An easy Google will find them. But they received over 21 separate lawsuits that were combined into a class action suit, because when they were auctioning these paintings, sometimes in the tens of thousands of dollars, they were acting as the appraiser also. So the gallery selling it is appraising their own art they're selling, which really is a conflict of interest. Right. Well, it turns out they were found guilty of appraising things at a completely higher inflated value. And back when this was much more prominent, people didn't have the cell phones or reception where maybe they could do some quick research to see if this painting is really worth what it is. So these people are unsuspecting, and they buy the art. They go back home, and if they're smart, they want to get insurance on it, which is where we came into play. The agent will believe the value because they have the appraisal that says what it's worth. At the end of the day, it was worth either nothing or a fraction of what it was worth. That company has since, after the class action lawsuits, claimed they've changed their ways. Well, the interesting part is they're still operating almost in every cruise line right now, still doing the auctions. They claim that they've changed their business model, their processes, and they're on the up and up now. But that's kind of an example where I call it the switcheroo claims, where it's a theft, but they're insuring one thing that's much cheaper than the real deal. And if anyone does an easy Google search and for fake Rolexes, for example, I found a site immediately, and the keyword is replica, not fake. And if you type in replica Rolexes, you can get a one worth $9,000-$10,000 for $200. And what's really funny is for an extra $60, and this is right on their webpage, they will send you warranty papers in the actual box as if it were real. So you wonder, how is this even legal? I don't know the answer to that. I know a lot of these firms are offshore. They run from other countries. Right. If you send them money, you might not even get what you asked for. But we would have plenty of people that would take that type of Rolex, insure it at its real value, and then when it's stolen, they make a claim and they get a brand new real Rolex. What a lot of people don't know is Rolexes keep tabs of their serial numbers with like the details of an IRS auditor. They know their stuff. They know every watch that was stolen, who owns it, where it goes. So our investigation would do that sort of thing. So we'd get a lot of high dollar theft type cases that were not exactly what they looked like they were.
So that's a really good foundation for stories, and really very accessible via Google to learn more about that and write those into our stories. Another one that you mentioned to me is vehicle theft and export. So what do we need to know about that?
Yeah, the insurance crimes seem to have sort of a reciprocal effect with the economy, meaning when the economy gets bad, people will commit these crimes they wouldn't normally commit. And you've seen plenty of people that get in over their heads, so maybe a car that's too expensive. So where I live in South Florida, there's a huge network of canals, thousands of miles of canals. It was very routine to have cars pulled out of canals, and they were cars that were reported stolen. In fact, law enforcement used to invite our teams to help them, which was so much fun. It was like a field trip. They would line up along. There's a canal here in Broward County that reaches the Everglades. It's actually very spooky because it's on a rural road with no street lights and no guardrail.
Oh, wow.
And when you look into this water, cars were stacked up like dominoes. One day they pulled 18 in one day. They would get tow trucks. They would have a diver. And it's really gross. These divers told me they had to get special shots because of the God knows what's in the water.
Wow.
They would swim down, hook a chain to the car, pull it out. And in 99% of the cars, the key was in the ignition. Oh. So when the cars were reported stolen to us, they give us a story like they were at the mall 2 weeks ago and all they know is their car is gone, that sort of thing. And kind of a creepy side note to this is, I watch a lot of thrillers and crime movies. That's my thing. And I knew one day they're going to find something on one of those cars and I'm not really going to want to see it. So on one day, they pulled cars 2 days in a row. On the second day, I wasn't able to make it. Sure enough, they pulled a car. There was a body in the driver's seat, a gentleman. It was ruled not to be a crime. The poor guy had been missing for 12 years. His family didn't know where he was going. He simply took this shortcut from his house to his parents and never showed up. And the spooky part is he was in this really shallow water, but it was so murky no one could see it, sitting at the driver's seat for 12 years with people just fishing around and not seeing him, not knowing. And it's very creepy. And I've seen cases online with Google Earth shots of canals and you just see cars. Really? And it's really disturbing. But that's kind of like a disturbing side of what some of our cases can uncover. But also another way they love to get rid of cars is you pay people to make them go away. And a lot of those cars wind up exported out of the country. For example, I live near Port Everglades. It's one of the largest ports in the world. A vast majority of their stuff goes southbound, South America, Central America. We would have we'll call them bad guys for lack of a better word, they would order cars for themselves because the tariffs are so high in South America, for example, that the car would almost cost double to legitimately get it.
Oh, wow.
So what they do is they contact their contacts in South Florida, and we've proven they have actual databases of cars, which is scary, which means they drive up and down your road and they'll say, I want a brand new white Porsche SUV. They go in a database, find one, they know where it's parked, and they go steal it very simply because these are experts.
Right.
And then they're exported out of Port Everglades in these shipping containers. So what Customs used to do every now and then, not as much lately, but it was another field trip. Customs would invite our teams of investigators to help them search the cargo containers. And it was a random search. They would do like every third one. They would check the manifest on the container to read what's supposed to be inside. It'll say baby food, baby clothes, whatever. You open it, and behind several bales of hay would be a brand new SUV or a Porsche or whatever. And we would find a number of those. And at that time, I was 5'7", 140 pounds. So every container they opened, they'd go, Rich, you climb to the front of this thing and look for it. And one customs agent goes, watch out, because those drug lords sometimes put booby traps. So, of course, I never knew if he was joking or not, but it scared me. But we found a lot of cars, and some of them hadn't been reported stolen yet because they were told to have a waiting period. So we were there because we could type in the VIN number on a laptop and see if it's a car that we insure. And if we did, we'd call them and go, how's everything going? Great, great. The car hadn't been stolen or anything. They reported stolen like a week later, but we already know it's in a container in Port Everglades. So anytime the economy goes bad, we keep our eyes peeled for that sort of thing.
And that's a really good point, because it does lean heavily into what the economy is doing. And I'm sure that that is a really good point that we could write into our stories as well. Now, I know that you've also had some experience working with organized crime, and I hear you've got some interesting stories about the Russian Mafia. So can we dive into that?
Sure. And Russian Mafias could be viewed as a derogatory term. And I've spoken to groups before, and I go, I'm really sorry if you're from Eastern European nations, but every nationality seems to have an organized crime. We have an organized crime. Everyone's got an organized crime. The fancy word in the FBI is Eurasian organized crime, which generically in TV and movies is Russian Mafia. And the population is so heavy in North Miami Beach that our own Sun Sentinel newspaper, they dubbed it Little Moscow. So locally, that area is called Little Moscow. Now, of course, my disclaimer is there are hundreds of thousands of honest, hardworking people that come from Russia that live there, and everything's fine. But we also came across some organized activity, and they would have their finger a little bit in everything. They would have one arm would do vehicle theft, another fake medical clinics with dirty attorneys, dirty doctors, fake injuries. This one here, boat theft. They had a little bit of everything. They diversified. And I think one of the reasons for the growth in that is they talked about how much more money they made in something that used to contain violence, that they can make more on one case than a drug dealer that's been selling drugs, which has a zero tolerance of going straight to jail. And for the insurance crimes, a lot of the stuff either doesn't get investigated or doesn't really go much further as far as in the legal process. So they're making a lot of money. An interesting little side note that I remind people, most insurance proceeds are tax-free. And I was speaking to one group that contained some federal agents, and there was this woman from the IRS on the side, and I can tell she didn't want to be there. Her boss probably made her go. She was on her laptop multitasking. And as soon as I said, yeah, someone had a $500,000 injury claim and they were paid tax-free, her eyes lit up. She, wait, say that again? Tax-free, $500,000 tax-free. So a lot of these organizations, they use the insurance crimes to generate a ton of money, which is actually laundering it because the money appears to be coming from a legitimate source, such as an insurance carrier. So they're involved in a lot of things. One case that kind of had us intermingle with this is we had a spike in thefts of Rolexes, expensive jewelry. And for some reason, a large chunk of these people were airline pilots. South Beach, some in Boca and Palm Beach. And it was like the ritzy areas of South Beach mostly. These are gentlemen that had great jobs. They have money.
Right.
And they were alone with what they're doing because they're a pilot or something like that. So this is the caution I would give whenever I speak to a room of, I say to the men, if a young lady comes up to you and she seems to like you a little bit more than what you're used to, have your red flag go up. Because what these Russian moms were doing, they called them the B girls, which stands for bar girls. They
Okay.
would hire aspiring model types from Eastern Europe with 90-day visas and fly them over. They give them an apartment, and they would go out at night with what they literally call hunting, and they would hunt in packs. They go out in South Beach to the really high-end bars, high-end hotels, and they look for these gentlemen that are sitting alone. Expensive watches were big, rings, jewelry, etc. And this is a story I'm sure you've heard about where their drinks are drugged. The men don't remember what happened for 24 to 48 hours. They wake up and their stuff's gone. Well, a large majority of these don't get reported because A, they're embarrassed.
Right.
B, they might be married, right?
Yes.
But every now and then they would make these insurance claims. And they were honest and forthright. They're like, yeah, I met this girl. I don't know what happened. And at first the story sounded preposterous until we started seeing a trend and a pattern. So sure enough, there was a criminal arrested in South Florida with the Eastern European Mafia that exposed this scheme, the B-girl scheme. And to this day, there's a lot of copycat type schemes about it. There was a prominent weatherman from Philadelphia that made his story public. He didn't care how he would be viewed. He wanted to put a light on it.
Right.
I think they tapped out his American Express at like $43,000 for art that was sold to him that was worthless, and they took his credit card and they just drained it. And what protects a lot of the bad guys with this, in Florida at least, is what they call innkeeper laws. And they were devised to protect restaurants and bars from tourists. A tourist might come in,
Right.
might say, you're billing me wrong, I'm not going to pay this, and then they fly away. So the innkeeper laws make it where you have to pay the business first and then dispute it, either with your bank or your credit card company. So in all these cases, the girls would bring their victims to a private champagne bar or private vodka bar, which are these fake overnight clubs they would set up, bring them in, milk all their credit cards, just drain the credit cards. And if anyone disputed or threatened to call the cops, they were told they had to pay the bill first and then dispute it. So we get a lot of those. It seemed like a very small, innocent claim, a stolen Rolex, and it would turn into something much larger.
That's incredibly sophisticated for them to figure out all those pieces and then be able to put it all together. And then for you to have to identify those trends and pick that up and actually go through the process of investigating it. That's a lot of work. And I feel like that would make an incredible story right there. So authors, take note. If you have questions, we would love to get those answered. Feel free to drop those in the comments, and we'll be watching those over the next couple of days and weeks for you as well. And I know that you've had some other really interesting experiences. I specifically want to touch a little bit on human trafficking and how that kind of came into play with your investigations.
Well, it's a really hot topic now. Trafficking is probably one of the worst crimes you can do, especially if it involves young people, children, females. It's bad no matter who you are. And again, we could have an innocent civilian sort of case that goes down that road into something darker and worse. And in our case, it was stolen boats, which doesn't sound that crazy, but the type of boats that were getting stolen were very specific. They had high engines for high speed, huge gas tanks, and huge cargo areas, which means these boats aren't really designed for just fishing with your family. It's basically designed for hauling a bunch of something really fast. So we started noticing a trend with certain types of boats, and it was actually 3 different brands that we narrowed it down to that kept getting stolen. And what was curious is the owners of the boats had no history of ever buying boats. Now, keep in mind, these are over $100,000 speedboats.
Okay.
We found owners that were elderly women. It just didn't make sense, and they were reports of boats stolen. Well, a lot of boat policies are what's called valued policies, which means the amount you buy is exactly what you're paid. There's no depreciation. So if tomorrow you buy a policy for $100,000 and your boat's stolen the next day, you get paid $100,000 tax-free. So the way the scheme operated, and what I'm talking about with human smuggling in my area, and this applies to all the coastal states on the south, was Cuban immigrants. They'd pay a lot of money to leave their country to come to our country. They didn't want to risk. You hear about these rafts and things where people have died, very unsafe. Well, they're getting preyed on by human smugglers.
Okay.
And they would pay hard-earned money to come to America. And before Obama left office, we had what's called a wet foot, dry foot policy, which means as soon as you land, you can stay. So despite that going away, we still have immigrants that they want to come to our country that bad, and life is so horrible where they are, it's still happening. So these human smugglers are another form of organized crime. At last I talked to Coast Guard, they're paying about $10,000 per person cash.
Oh, wow.
Imagine, I don't know if my family could cough up 10,000 if I went missing. That's a lot of money. And these are people that don't make money, which means the ones that aren't paying are exchanging something else for that, whether it's indentured servitude, some other type of crime, or some horrible thing they have to do once they get here. So they would pick up the refugees there, and they would make $10,000 per head for however many they can literally crush into this boat. And then during the night, come over to the U.S., they get as close to a beach as they can and basically dump them. And the truth is, there's not enough Coast Guard and law enforcement to stop them. They do it late, they do it at night, a moonless night, the whole thing, and it's still happening. And when we started catching it, it was law enforcement in the Keys, the Florida Keys, that reached out to us. And another important part of my job I meant to mention is we have to work very closely with these law enforcement agencies for some synergy. And for this boat theft, we would reach out to the various boat police in the Keys, and they realized we had information they need, they have information we need. So we built these great working relationships. So the way the scheme worked, the bad guy would approach someone with a clean record. That's why we had the elderly grandma. Okay, she has a clean record. The bad guy says, I'll give you enough money for the down payment on a boat. You just walk in, buy it, and then go to your insurance agent, get a policy. And then next Tuesday, I might sort of borrow your boat from your backyard, but don't say anything. So the bad guy then uses that boat for their smuggling activities. If all goes well, they return the boat in the backyard, and they'll do it again next week. If for any reason it's confiscated or sunken or anything else, they tell the owner to make the insurance claim, and they're paid the $100,000 the next day. And keep in mind, in some of these cases, a $110,000 boat, the first month's premium can be like $400. So they only pay that first month of $400 to get $110,000 tax-free within days.
Wow.
So it's scary. And when they're catching these boats, they're finding babies, children. There were a few high-speed chases. I was with my family once in Key West. I remember it's July 8th. It was my birthday. They had chased a boat filled with refugees, and they went so fast without any regard for their safety. And a female who was pregnant went overboard and died. So these smugglers don't care. It's all about the money, and it is human trafficking, because the ones that can't afford the $10,000, I don't have real evidence, but evidence from law enforcement of a lot of things they have to do in this country to earn back that money. So what started as a very simple boat claim turns into kind of a whole dark underworld that we didn't even know existed.
And we talked a little bit about how you have to work with different law enforcement people. So can we talk a little bit about that relationship? What does that look like? Is it involving a bunch of phone calls? Are there in-person meetings? Obviously, you're going to be on site for some of these different occurrences. So what does that look like from an author perspective?
Well, from an author perspective, it's funny in my writing, just to kind of add humor or a monkey wrench. I told you we don't have badges, we don't have guns. Right. In my writing, the insurance investigator has no respect. They get no respect. The cops are like, you're a civilian, get out of our way. You don't belong here. And it makes it harder. It turns out in the real world, we actually have a wonderful working relationship, because, again, they realize we have information that helps their case and vice versa. We don't make arrests or even try to, but they can. And we
Right.
have various agencies. One's called the NICB, who's a clearinghouse. We can give our information to them, and then they pass it along to the proper law enforcement agencies.
Okay.
And then they do a separate investigation based on what we gave them. And a lot of those do involve arrest, convictions, all that sort of thing. So it is kind of rewarding when you see that happen to the right people. The biggest thing we try to do is just curb the activity completely, so they just stop doing it. But to answer your question, I've been fortunate enough to meet FBI agents. Coast Guard, work very closely with them. Fire marshals and arson experts is very important.
Okay.
In fact, there's professional groups that we would meet and intermingle a lot with these type of experts, and it was a lot of fun. Towards the end of my tenure, I got invited to a meeting with Secret Service. Now, I thought Secret Service is just the guys that protect the president.
Right.
I didn't realize there's a whole branch that investigate financial crimes. And I didn't know that. So they invited us to a meeting, and I didn't know why. And it was really fun going into their building, and you see the big crest on the floor, and all these guys, they're wearing suits exactly like in the movies. It's exactly accurate. I'm like, what do you want from us? And they were investigating fraudulent medical clinics that were billing millions of dollars that were fraudulent. Well, it dawned on them that we have the same cases they're working on. And there are certain statutes in Florida that allow us to share that information directly with them.
Okay.
So when they found that out, it opened up a whole avenue without them needing subpoenas or warrants where they can get the same information. So then we built really good relationships with the Secret Service. So that was kind of new and exciting as well.
That is really valuable information. And I like that you pointed out that there are some things that Hollywood actually does get correct, like men in suits. So let's break down what Hollywood has not gotten correct in terms of working with your different jobs and the different things that you've experienced in your career. What red flags should we be looking out for?
It's funny. If you ever see an FBI agent in a movie, they always have the suit and tie. They always have a suit and tie. My guys probably had a polo shirt and jeans, right? But where they get right and wrong, well, first of all, I don't think we're properly recognized. Like I said, it's a very small niche, which is the reason why I talk to writing groups and go, hey, here's a whole angle you might want to think about. When I said earlier, not getting the respect, it's because when I call these invisible insurance crimes, everything I've told you doesn't get a lot of press, doesn't get a lot of publicity. And when I tell people these things are going on, they can't believe it. It's because much bigger stories go on the air, like a murder or a Kardashian story or something. It's much more important than these insurance crimes. And not to get corny, but who's paying these insurance crimes? The people that are paying the insurance are directly paying for this stuff. So they should be a little bit interested in that. So you don't see a lot of that in movies. The only time I've seen insurance investigators are kind of on that real high end, like they're in Europe and they investigate crimes at a museum for paintings. That stuff exists, and that's kind of fun. What they get wrong is today, probably the vast majority of these type of investigators work through analytics sitting at a cubicle all day. I've seen people crack entire cases worth millions of dollars in arrest and everything, all done from spreadsheets while sitting in a cubicle day in and day out. But that wouldn't make a good book or a movie. So you don't need much on that.
Talk to me a little bit about the paperwork side of things, because so often we will see the big glamorous things that are made for movies and TV, but we don't necessarily see the behind the scenes work. So without going into too much detail, what types of paperwork are we looking at? What types of programs are we looking at? What should we be Googling to learn a little bit more about to write effectively in our story?
Again, analytics is the big one. I'm not an analytics expert. I've used their findings to help me with my investigations. I've learned a lot about that in my own writing, just from online research of analytics, because FBI has huge analytics. The Navy, I learned on a recent book I'm working on, a huge analytics side. Almost any investigative agency today, because of the power of automation and computers, can crunch millions of cases and figure out what's the common denominator between all of them. And it would take a human months or years to do that, and a computer can do it in seconds. So there's a lot of that type of software involved. As far as paperwork, imagine what we're accusing people of. We have to be very, very, very convinced that we're right. So there's a lot of in the approval process, because what can happen if you accuse somebody of something that bad, or God forbid they get arrested, and then it turns out it wasn't what you thought it was, you set yourself up for being sued for what's called malicious prosecution. You've ruined their lives. They were arrested in front of their coworkers and friends. It's really bad. So the approval process is huge. We lean on our attorneys very heavily. Usually the law enforcement gets involved in that part of it. That's why we don't make arrests or do anything like that. But we have to be very careful with what we share with law enforcement, and then they need to be equally careful. So sometimes that paperwork gets a little tedious, but it's necessary.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned that there's different softwares, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the equipment of the trade that you are going to use. So we know, of course, technology and softwares, but what else should we be aware of as writers?
Photography is huge.
Okay.
A funny one is social media.
Okay.
People that seem to be guilty aren't necessarily geniuses. A lot of them don't understand the security settings on their social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. For example, we had a young man who was in an auto accident, claim was injured so bad he can't walk. The guy's in a breakdancing competition, and it's on YouTube with him breakdancing. So we just quietly sent a DVD to his attorney on that, and the attorney quietly withdrew from the case. We've had people brag about their schemes on social media. Parties that supposedly hit each other and they don't know each other are hanging out on the weekend at Universal Studios together. It's amazing. Something as simple as social media can almost make a whole entire case. But tools of the trade also is a lot of statements, a lot of recorded statements. We have more formal statements taken by attorneys where it's under oath, and we have to be trained in investigation techniques. For example, and people can use this on their children, if someone repeats the question back to you, it's usually a red flag. Where were you Thursday at 8? Where was I Thursday at 8? Like, uh-oh. So a lot of that type of stuff. And we go to a lot of conferences and meetings for ongoing training, and a lot of that.
How much professional development is required as part of the job? Is it something that you have to do yearly, or is it just every once in a while?
I can only speak for Florida. There is a certain number of continuing education that is required. A lot of individual companies, if they're good, will have a minimum number of continuing ed in your actual field they want to see every year, whether it's a few hours. We have a lot of professional organizations, the same ones where we get to chat with law enforcement and our attorneys. A lot of those afford continuing ed credits just for attending, but it is important to stay on top of all the new stuff, and especially as technology gets better.
In general, is that something that the individual gets to decide what they're going to study further, or is it something that's kind of, here's one and only option, or is it something where the companies that you're working for are going to say, we want these specific things handled?
There's usually a lot of different options, and people will choose something that is currently what's in their field.
Okay.
Or you have the ones that they feel like they know their job that well, and they, out of curiosity, want to learn about some other things.
Okay.
So usually to answer your question, there's a lot of different opportunities.
Fantastic. So when it comes to authors researching their stories more, are there specific resources we should be looking at? Are there handbooks out there? Are there websites that we should be mindful of?
I hate to make it as simple as Google and the internet. The truth is, today you can find almost anything and everything. If you go on Reddit and Quora, there's so many experts that people ask questions to. I had 1 million questions for the operation of a nuclear submarine. And I met so many people on these websites that gave me more information than I could possibly use. The slang, the day-to-day, what that knob's called, what you use this for, and it's all there. And I really don't know how I would write that same stuff 30 years ago.
Right. It really is important to crowdsource information when it comes to researching our stories, because we're going to find so many things and have access to so many more minds than we did in the past. So I love the fact that you do spend your time here doing your research. I want to make sure that we've covered everything that we need to know for authors to authentically write these white collar crimes. So are there any other stories we need to share?
Well, what's funny is when I give these speeches to similar writing groups, I said it's going to serve two different purposes. One is it's interesting, you can use it in your writing. The other is it can apply to you in your real day-to-day life, because all of you buy insurance or have to pay for insurance, whether it's your car, a rental, an apartment, a house, you're paying for insurance. And a good chunk of that is going directly to pay for fraud and bad guys. So everyone sort of has a dog in this fight. So I use some of the stories as like cautionary tales. Like, for example, one that came up recently was generically, law enforcement calls them gypsies. That's sort of an antiquated word because real gypsies are various groups from Eastern Europe. In America, it's a generic term for traveling groups that sometimes are involved in scam type activity, usually preying on people, sadly, elderly, people that don't know any better, that sort of thing. So as a warning, and when I first learned this stuff, I never thought it would hit close to home. And then it happened in my actual neighborhood at my door. These people look like you and I. They're predominantly in the southeastern United States. They call themselves travelers, also known as Irish travelers or Irish Mafia. They have a very finite list of last names, which is really funny. Like, and you can look it up, and I don't want to say any because a lot of your viewers will have that name and go, hey, I'm not a bad guy. But finite number of names. They come down in the winter for the sole reason to commit insurance crimes door to door, or really just every type of crime, primarily repair activity. These are the people that knock on your door and they say, I see you have damage on your roof. I'll do it for $2,000 cash. Someone pays them and then they don't do the work, or they do it very poorly. A very common one is someone knocks on the door and they say, I'm putting asphalt on your neighbor's driveway and I made too much asphalt, so I'll do yours for only $500. Sounds like a good deal. And then at the end of the day, they just paint your driveway with cheap black paint that washes away the first time it rains, and they have your money. But those also have gotten darker. There was a woman in Texas who one money-making way for them is to buy insurance policies on people that may not be around much longer. They found one woman in South Carolina that had 56 policies on herself, and none of them were her children or family members, but the insurance policies did belong to known travelers, and they basically wait around for this person to die. You wonder, how did they buy these policies? Well, a gentleman in South Carolina was arrested who was an agent who was selling these policies for a kickback.
Of course.
Not the company I worked for. This is just through my investigation. And even darker, there was a woman in Texas, over 70 years old, and a father-son group would do chores for her, but they were keeping their eyes on her because they had $1 million policy on her, and they wound up murdering her with a knife. And when they were arrested, law enforcement asked why they did it, and they said she didn't appear that she was going to die anytime soon.
Wow.
So again, something that starts as very simple, like I'm going to fix your driveway, turning very dark very quickly. These people aren't saints. And the funniest one that happened at my house, and I don't know who would fall for this, is they knock on the door selling meat, and they have a truck, and they go, I have too much meat, whether it's fish, beef, chicken, whatever. Do you want to buy some meat? So of course I don't want to buy any meat from a guy in a truck, but you might laugh at that, but it happens where it actually happened at my door at my house. So so there's things like that that can apply to your real life. Be careful if someone's driving very close on your butt. Say you're on the interstate, you're in the fast lane, and someone's on your butt, and part of you just wants to slam on the brake, give them a good scare. That's what they want you to do, because the bad guys that stage accidents look for nice cars because they probably have good insurance on them. They look for drivers that are driving alone because they may be less adversarial, and they hope that you slam on the brakes and you hit them. But who's going to always be at fault in these cases? The person that does the rear ending. I mean, the other way around, because the person that slams on the brake, all they have to say is that a dog darted out in front of their car or something like that. They slam on the brakes, you rear end them. Right. So I say, don't be a target. Be careful. A lot of times things are a setup. They want you to do things like that, and just be cautious.
So how do you, as somebody who is aware of all of these things, handle situations where you can identify that maybe something isn't quite right, like someone knocking on your door with a truck full of meat?
Well, that's what I say to my wife. She hates when I watch these Datelines, because in the first 5 minutes, I know who did it and why and how, or how many times have you heard a news story and the first thing you think of is, that doesn't make any sense at all. And later you find out it's something really, really strange. So yeah, I tend to get cynical where I might not believe things. We all drive by those businesses. We make a joke here, the mattress stores, and there's not one customer ever. And I'm like, money laundering. My wife's like, I'm saying that for every business that has no customers. So you can get a little cynical, so you try not to.
I love that, because I also make those comments. Yeah. Now, I know because you are an author, you've been able to implement what you've learned along the way in your career into your stories. So before we let you go, tell us a little bit about your books.
All right. Well, shameless plug. I guess my most successful one to date is called Storm Crashers. It won Best Popular Fiction at the Florida Book Awards here. My wife and I got to go to the governor's mansion and have a luncheon. It was like really exciting, really fun. That was based on a seed of an idea through my work that Sanibel Islands off the coast of Florida is only accessible by a bridge. And a hurricane, Charlie, came, washed it out, and you couldn't get to the island. So they actually had a news alert on the radio that said, don't try to go back to the island. There's no electricity, and police will be unable to go there. Well, the island is all mansions. So I thought, you just announced to every wannabe burglar that there's mansions with the alarms don't work and the police won't come. And I go, wow, why couldn't you just have a boat? You could go to door like the Grinch, slowly stealing things. So that idea made it where I have a high-tech team of burglars that purposely attack coastal areas that are evacuated for hurricanes. So they have to swoop in. They have a countdown clock. They have to hurry and get everything done before the hurricane hits the shore. They have night vision, blah, blah, blah. So I write my own screenplays from my own books. And that one got optioned by 20th Century Fox, which was very exciting. And it was a lot of fun going out there and shopping it around. But ultimately, it didn't get picked up, what's called. And one reason is the idea immediately got ripped off by about 3 other companies right after that. Yeah. My agent told me everything you write would take $200 million to film. And I go, well, okay, yeah. Ooh. A lot of special effects and stuff. Right. But that one did well. And the same story I told you about the Russian mob with the B girls, that way, all that made it into my book, The Eyes of Poseidon, which takes place in Miami and involves Russian organized crime. And I was able to weave in all those real life stories. And I have a new one that's being published in October that has nothing to do with insurance crimes in any way, but it is a tech thriller. When I was a kid, one of my favorite books were 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, specifically the ride at Disney World. If anyone's old enough to remember that. It's called, what's it when I'm sorry, I'm forgetting a regular word, where a book is so old, public domain.
Yes.
It's public domain. So I could rewrite 20,000 Leagues myself and publish it. So I said to myself, is there a way to update it and make it modern that's in any way barely plausible? And with my contacts with Coast Guard, I know that if you've ever heard the word narco sub, ever?
Yes.
A narco sub is a homemade submarine made by drug cartels to transport drugs. And these are homemade submarines. And the truth is, they're getting bigger and better every single year. and the Colombian Coast Guard catches more and more every single year. The biggest fear I hear is they get their hands on a black market Russian submarine, because there is a documentary on Netflix right now called Operation Odessa that this guy that worked for the cartel came very, very close to buying a submarine from Russia with a captain and crew.
Wow.
And it was stopped before it could happen, but it means it's within the realm of possibility. Right. So in my story, there's a bad captain that used to work for the cartels that has a high-tech sub. So I was able to get a lot of information from my Coast Guard contacts and stuff like that. So that's coming out in October.
That's incredible, and I'm really excited to read that because I am all about techie thrillers, and that sounds fantastic. Where can everybody connect with you online to learn more about your stories and what you do?
Yeah, richwickliffe.com. I should have done it Richard, but it's richwickliffe.com. I update that as best I can. But Amazon, just by Googling Richard Wickliffe on Amazon, I have my own author page there with my stuff is on there. Rich Wickliffe author page on Facebook. And I update that stuff, especially with my new one coming out in October. There's a lot of information. And on all three of those are ways to contact me. If you have any questions, technical questions, or anything like that, I'm happy to help.
If you love this episode, be sure to hit that subscribe and notification bell for more episodes of Experts for Authors, where I interview people like FBI agents and CIA analysts, everything from lawyers to airline captains and aquatic experts. We're breaking down those tips and tricks that you need to know to write authentically within the occupations that you want to include inside of your stories. And be sure to follow along because Rich is coming back to break down what exactly it looks like turning a book into a movie adaptation for big or small screens, and what that looks like from a first-hand experience with it. Drop your questions and comments on today's episode and how you can be writing these unique white-collar insurance crimes into your stories in a way that's going to get the world's attention, because it's not given as much attention in terms of Hollywood settings. Drop those questions below. We'll get them answered as quickly as possible, and we'll see you for our next episode of Experts for Authors and daily videos here on the channel.